Hello my debaucherous darlings, and welcome back to the Goth Attacked. So this is part 2 in a series where I tell you about how, with a group of wonderful friends, we all built a sculpture and then burnt it to the ground. If you want to know more about this sculpture or the context of it and the design, I go through all that in part 1. So pause this video and go check that out, and I will wait for you here. Okay, now that we are all caught up, it's time to get into the build. Now the temple design essentially had 4 main components to the build itself. The first being the metal base. This was the essential structural component needed to make sure that the temple would stand and be a safe structure. The whole metal base I knew I was going to bury. This is something that's really important for me to think about. All different types of people are going to be using the space that I create, and so I want to make sure from an accessibility perspective that this is thought about, and I knew I didn't want things on the ground that people could trip over or have difficulty traversing. And so making sure to include a base structure that was buried was very important to me in the design. The second component is the wood structure, and this includes the benches on all 6 sides that people were going to be able to sit in. This is a fairly simple structure to build, and it was essentially going to be the structure that we were burning at the end. And so because both the metal base and the wooden structure needed to begin fabrication fairly quickly, we essentially split the team in 2 and began moving forward on both of these fronts. This is something that does happen with a lot of projects. We got the grant and it's a very, very tight timeline that you have to turn around. And so being able to divide and conquer was a really good way for us to accelerate the build process and make sure that we could get this done on time. Now I knew that the structural design of the temple itself was a fairly simple composition, and so from a fabrication perspective there was nothing crazy that we were going to be worrying about with the metal base or the wooden upright structures themselves. However, one of the most important things to think about when you're designing something like this is making sure you test fit components that you're fabricating separately. I cannot tell you how many times in the past I've built components that I've designed separate of each other, and then you go to bring them together and it's like, oh no, something doesn't fit. Something isn't working as anticipated. And so it's very important early on to test fit those things. And so we essentially built a quadrant of the temple and then test fit it to make sure that it was going to work before we pushed forward with the rest of the fabrication. Now, the third component for the temple are the filigree panels that skin the outside of the structure. Essentially, there are 6 benches on the 6 sides of the asterisk of the design, and going up the back and over top are these filigree panels that I had mentioned. And the point of this was to create really interesting, beautiful rendered light that was going to be falling on people as they were sitting and enjoying the temple space. I really loved the idea of people being able to take a calm moment and having the shadows that are falling across them from these filigree panels above you really creating an interesting moment for you to experience in this space. And so fortunately I have access to a CNC, and it's always good when you can to get the robot army to do the work. Fortunately, the filigree panels were a pretty simple 2x2 design, and so cutting them up on the CNC was not incredibly complicated. And this is really important to think about when you're creating something that's a bigger project or just going to take you longer, is try to balance the complexity of some pieces with making other pieces less complicated. It's just going to save yourself time, energy, and brain space, and you don't have to juggle a bunch of different difficult things all at once. I knew going in that the skylight we were creating was going to be a really big moment for the design, and because of that, I also knew it was going to be very time intensive and detail oriented in terms of the fabrication of it. And so once we had gotten the metal base all set and ready to go, the uprights done, and we had gotten all the filigree panels cut out and ready to go, it was time to work on the skylight. For the skylight construction, I had designed a metal star-shaped frame, and this was going to be welded out of small-scale metal rod. And then we were going to cut out on the CNC the skylight panels using plywood, painting them, and then covering them in resin. And this was going to be a really good way to create the look of stained glass while being something that was more affordable, more manageable to fabricate, as well as being something that could withstand being outside in the weather for a week. Because we were creating so many disparate components, I knew that creating the metal frame and the CNC cut pieces that were going to be resined, getting them to fit perfectly was going to be a pretty difficult and time-consuming task. And so instead, I opted to shrink the design of all of the pieces that were going into the CNC that we were going to resin, so that way they would float in the center of each of the components of the skylight frame. Obviously, if I had more time, I would want these things to fit beautifully and all clean, but sometimes you have to make that compromise when you're building something at large scale or something that you have to turn around very quickly. I think it's important to, as a designer and an artist and a maker, begin to get a sense of places where you can get the same effect and goal of what you're trying to do with your art while not sacrificing the timeline, the cost, or your own mental energy. I think perfection is often something that comes up a lot in the creative community. I think the idea of perfection often scares people away from being creative, and this is really unfortunate. Perfection is the enemy of creativity. You don't have to do things perfectly to be able to be creative and to enjoy what you're doing. And so if I could give one sense of advice perpetually to anybody who's wanting to create or be a maker or be an artist, is to not focus on creating perfect things. The perfection is going to eat away at you, and you're never going to feel truly satisfied with the beautiful things that you make. Enjoy the process, enjoy the outcome and where you end up, and try to create things that emote feeling or experience. If you're focusing on how something makes you feel, you're far more likely to be happy and pleased with it in the end, rather than focusing on creating something that's perfect. I think it's also important on large-scale projects to always think of ways that you can make things easier on yourself, limit the complexity, create redundancies even, because sometimes redundancies often make sure that if one thing goes awry, at least you have a backup plan. And I think this is something that you will learn slowly over time, but being open to problem solving, I think, is a really useful tool in your tool belt as a maker. So we were getting to the point in the process where we had the metal frame and the uprights and the structure done and ready to go. The CNC cut panels that were going to be the outside were cut and ready to go. And we're really getting into the cutting, the painting, and doing the resin on the skylight. And this is about the time where we found out that the fire marshal was not really pleased with the idea of us using the thin scale plywood on the filigree panels, because the original intention was to include that in the burn. Coordinating with the fire marshal, with local authorities when you're creating things like this is a really important thing that will come up when you're creating larger scale art. Even if you're creating something for somebody else, you have to think about the client or the space that it's in. And so being able to think on your feet and problem solve and be flexible is very important. It was interesting because in years past, plywood has never been an issue, but the new fire marshal didn't want us to burn it. And so we had to pivot. Fortunately, I believe this created a unique opportunity. Originally, the panels were going to be burned with the structure, but the easy solution was to just take down those panels, and then it's still the main structure that we would burn. We were going to pack firewood in anyways because we knew that as part of the design. We were going with something that felt more airy, and so to make sure we were going to have a good burn, I had planned to pack firewood and have that as a backup plan. And I really didn't want to overcomplicate things and essentially argue with the fire marshal. Like, they are the professional in the area in charge of safety. And so as a means to both respect that and to, I think, capitalize on an opportunity, we committed to taking the filigree panels off before the burn. And this both satisfied the fire marshal, but also allowed us to do something very unique. Because we were no longer burning these pieces, we didn't have to leave them raw. You know, you can't burn paints or solvents and things like that. It's really unsafe. And so now that we knew we were taking them down, it gave us the opportunity to do one of my favorite finishing techniques, which is using a faux metal patina technique. Essentially what this is it's a paint that has metal particulates suspended in the paint, and then you have an oxidizing patina that will come with it, and when you spray this patina onto the surface that you've painted, it reacts with the flecks of metal in the paint, and then it looks like it's real metal that is weathered and aging. Not only is this patina technique really beautiful and really easy to do, it had the added benefit of relating to the site that we were creating Temple in. It's a New England site, it's a wooded area. Copper patinas green naturally here really well, and you see it used a lot in the local architecture, and it's something that a lot of the historic buildings use. And so it was a really beautiful way to tie in the temple that we were designing with the local architectural history and the space that we were creating it for. A trick that I have for when I do the copper patina is before I start the process, I will spray a coat of whatever color metal I'm doing. So in this case, we're doing a copper patina. And so I did a first coat of spray paint underneath everything. And that way I can sponge on the metal patina paint over top of the spray paint. And this gives it a really nice two-tone effect and allows the paint to spread a little bit further because it is a pricier paint to use. And then when you patina it, it's only reacting to the sponge painted areas, and I think it gives it a really beautiful natural look. And it's a way to take this technique and elevate it even further, and it's a very simple process. Another good trick that I used is because I wanted the panels to feel like they had patina naturally, and I wanted this to feel really convincing, what I did is the panels that were going to be on the side, as they were drying with the patina, I laid them upright. So that way the patina was running down the face of it, which is what would happen if copper was out in the elements and water was hitting it. You get those run marks of the rain patina happening, versus all the top panels we laid flat to dry, which created a more sponged on look. And I think this is a really clever way to, again, take this technique even further and take it beyond something that might not look as convincing up close, and then suddenly, because I've allowed these drips to run down it just like you would see in natural copper patina, it suddenly becomes really beautiful and convincing, and I think makes it much more interesting. I really love that almost rain stained effect, and I cannot recommend this process highly enough. It is a really fun thing to do, and you can do it on basically any paintable surface. At this point, we were a little less than a month out from Firefly, which meant it was time to go up to the site and start putting things together. We knew ahead of time we were going to erect the main part of the structure before the event even started to save us time on the actual building of the structure on site, which, if you've ever built something large scale on site, sometimes things come up, you need more hardware, you need more materials, and then you're having to run out and go to the store. And so it's always good to give yourself more time than you need to make sure that everything goes smoothly on site. Installing the main structure was a lot of digging, a lot of screwing, a lot of nonsense, but it was a lot of really great fun with people who I love and adore. And I cannot express my love and gratitude for my crew enough. This was a lot of digging and burying and erecting and screwing things together, but it also was a lot of laughs. And it's just really wonderful when you get to build art with your best friends. being able to erect the main structure of the temple ahead of time really allowed us to have some breathing room and got us to the point where the only thing left to focus on was the skylight. Now, stained glass is a beautiful art form, and I genuinely hope to try it out one day. And so if that's something you'd like to watch me do, comment down below. I would love to take that on. But it's not necessarily the most accessible thing to do at this scale, especially when you don't know how to do it yet. As well as we knew this was going to be out for a week in the elements, and we didn't want to deal with worrying that this could break and then become a safety hazard for everyone involved. And so I designed the skylight to be made with resin instead of glass. Resin is a wonderful material. I love doing projects with it, and you can do so many interesting different types of things with resin. And the advantage of this is it allowed us to create something that really looked convincingly like stained glass, but was much simpler to fabricate. After we had CNC'd all the designs, we painted everything black because I wanted it to have the appearance of the leading that is traditionally seen in stained glass. And then we infilled the voids with resin. Now I know I'm talking through a lot of different processes in this video, and the scale of this project is really huge, and so I know there isn't a whole lot of time to go into real deep detail about these things, but if it's something that you would be interested in, I recommend checking out our Patreon. We do what is called a post-mortem, and it allows us to go into even deeper detail about the ins and outs of these projects. I provide material lists, plans for things, and so it's a really great resource, and it also means you get to support the channel, which we love. Now, resin pouring is one of the most fun things, and I really enjoy doing it, but there is a cure time. And so with essentially every flat surface of my house covered in something curing in resin, we were ready to start getting packed up for Firefly. Once we get to Firefly, we got our camp set up, which is essentially where we're going to live in the woods for the next week. And we finished installing the rest of the CNC panels as well as the skylight. It was great that we had gotten the main structure up because installing the panels and the skylight actually went pretty quickly. And with Temple installed and ready to be experienced at Firefly, we were able to just kick back, relax, have fun as a crew, and enjoy Firefly. It was really wonderful being able to enjoy the fruits of our labor and the many months of work that we had all put into Temple. And it was also really beautiful getting to experience this thing that we had all created together. Many of the crew, like me, have lost parents, friends, family throughout either the last couple of years or in years previous. And I truly believe that being able to create together ended up being a really beautiful and healing experience for all of us. There was a lot of love and support and holding one another and sharing space. And it was really beautiful getting to watch the other people at Firefly also enjoy and experience the temple and be able to sit there and hold space. I think it's always one of the most satisfying moments as an artist, a maker, a designer, a creator, to be able to sit back and watch other people experience and enjoy the thing that you've created. And it's always really lovely when people are able to appreciate and experience all of the thoughtful moments that you placed into the design. And I know sometimes this doesn't always happen. We can create things and they don't always come out the way we thought. But I feel really fortunate and I have so much gratitude for my crew and for Firefly for believing in us to be able to create this, because we were able to share Temple with everyone, and it really felt like there was a lot of meaning for people in this. So with all the big heavy feels, we were able to just sit back, relax, enjoy Firefly together, and towards the end of the week, it was time to get ready for the big burn. Designing and building something with the specific intention of burning it to the ground is a very strange and different way of designing, and I feel really fortunate that I got the opportunity to try this out. There's a mindset of a lack of permanence that you really have to place yourself in when you're designing and building something like this, when you know that it's going to be burned down, because if you get really attached, it's going to make that process really difficult. And it was a very freeing experience to design something specifically knowing that it was going to have a very short life, and the end of its life was going to be big and fiery, and this experience that I think was going to be really cathartic for everyone. Also, interestingly, it was a bit of an anxiety moment because people get really excited for the burns, and I think historically, if something doesn't burn the way you plan for it to burn, or the structure takes too long, or it just isn't a good setup and the fire doesn't look good, I think it sours people's memory and experience of the structure. And so we worked really hard to think about how to set this up best possible success, while also really thinking about how to do this safely. Now, all the safety warnings, we are professionals, and we had the support of a crew of people who specifically do safety, and so this is very much a do not try at home situation unless you know what you're doing. Our strategy for burning the temple was essentially, we first removed all of the non-burnable elements. The skylight, because it had resin, you can't burn that. The plywood panels that we had patinaed, we had already told the fire marshal we weren't going to burn them, so we pulled that. Then what we did is we stacked firewood around the perimeter of the main structure, and we stacked them in what's called a log cabin style. This is a really great way to stack firewood because it leaves a lot of room for air and it creates a really good burn. If you think about fire and the three things it needs, fuel, heat, and oxygen, the log cabin style works really well because it creates a void in the middle, allows for oxygen. That void also creates a space to protect the heat, and the wood itself is the fuel. Once we got everything stacked in, we packed in a lot of good fire starting materials. Things like the leftover paper rolls that come at the end of paper towels, and lint from the dryer, which is also a really great fire starter, or old pieces of newspaper, things like that, that help go up really quickly and get the fire going hot. We were getting to the point where the sun was starting to set, and so people were beginning to arrive around the temple, and it was finally time to add the fuel and get ready to light Temple on fire. Adding an accelerant is obviously a really easy way to ensure a good fire. We see this frequently. If you're trying to light a grill, oftentimes you will add lighter fluid. And this, I think, really helped us. I have reasonable confidence that it probably would have went well anyways because of the way we had stacked the wood and all the consideration we had done to make sure that we gathered good fire starting material and pack all that in. However, having that fail-safe and having the fuel was just a really easy way to make sure that this was going to go as good as possible. We got together as a crew and we lined up and we lit Temple on fire. It was a really wild ride. I don't think any of us were expecting it to go up as quickly as it had, and I was really pleased that the shape of Temple created a really beautiful doming effect to the fire. This was something that I did consider in the design. I wanted a structure that had that almost circular shape because I find that those structures tend to have a really beautiful shape to them. And I think people really appreciated that the actual burn itself felt as good and as cathartic as the experience of visiting Temple was. At this point, we just got to sit back and enjoy the burn with each other, and it ended up being a really beautiful night. In the morning, it was time to LNT, which is leave no trace. It's a very important process in doing any sort of site-specific artwork. You don't want to leave trash or things that don't belong in the environment. And so we LNT'd the site and we headed home. This whole process was a really wild ride, and I feel so honored to have had the opportunity to do this. I think it was a really beautiful way to pay respect and thoughtfulness to the memory of my dad, who spent his whole life passing down his making and creativity to me. And I firmly do believe that being able to grieve and process through creativity is a really helpful and healthy way to do so. Thank you so much for sticking through to the end of this very long journey with me. It's been really great getting to tell you guys about how we built this awesome sculpture, and I hope it's been really fun for you. If you enjoyed yourself, feel free to click subscribe and click the notification bell so you will get notified every time we post more creative nonsense here at the Gothatect. Until next time, be creative, live fully, and memento mori.